If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say to yourself, you got to mean this. Like, you got to be desperate. This is no game, this. It's like, my life is not everything I want it to be, and perhaps it's not everything that I need it to be. And by need, I mean my life is so unbearable that the suffering that's attendant upon that is make me nihilistic, cynical, bitter, resentful, homicidal, genocidal, unable to have a good relationship, prone to punish people for their virtues because of my jealousy, driving the proclivity to see evil everywhere except within my own heart. Like, these are problems, man. And you ask yourself, you sit on the bed and say, okay, man, I'm ready to learn something. Like, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? It's like, you meditate on that, you'll get an answer. And it won't be one you want, but it'll be the necessary one. And it's often something that will point you to small things. So Carl Jung said, people in the modern world don't see God because they don't look low enough. And so imagine you're in your messy bedroom, and you're sitting on the edge of the bed trying to have an honest dialogue with yourself. And the little voice says, it's pretty disgusting in here. And you think, well, I'm way above such trivial niceties as organizing my room. It's like, well, that's pride. That's arrogance. If you're above organizing what's actually yours, how in the world are you ever going to organize anything else? And so you get on your knees and you think, well, it's time to, take a brush to the toilet. And maybe that's where you start. And that works. Like, that works. You start making those micro improvements, like real micro improvements, real on the ground, actual micro improvements to things that are wrong, you'll improve unbelievably rapidly. Well, one of the really difficult things to learn when you're down and out is how far you're down, because it's humiliating. I was ill recently, and when I started to recover, I couldn't really button my shirts. I had to learn to do that again. I'd forgotten how to put my hands on keyboard. I didn't know where to put my hands. I had to learn to type again. Now, I hadn't lost all the knowledge, and it came back quite quickly. And the reason I'm saying that is because one of the impediments to people who've really taken a blow in their life is that things have fallen apart around them so badly that where they have to start is humiliating even to consider. The rule, it's a pretty straightforward rule when you want to get back on your feet, and the rule is you have to make the task small enough so that you'll do it, no matter how small that is. And that can, and I've worked with people. I mean, one of the things I've become well known for is my advice to start by cleaning up your room. But I had plenty of clients who couldn't go home and clean up their room. They hadn't cleaned up their room for like 20 years for all sorts of reasons. Maybe because every time they did try to do anything positive in their family, no matter what it was, they were immediately punished and undermined. And so if they even went home and dared to start cleaning up the room, they'd face resistance within the family that was just a manifestation of the 50,000 times they'd been discouraged in the past, but also a move that would upset the insanity that characterized the pattern of familial interactions. And so actually, if they even made a move to clean up their room, what they were doing simultaneously was confronting the dragon in the family that had made every single person in that household insane for like 5 generations, right? So it looks simple. It's not bloody simple. And so in a situation like that, you cut it down so that maybe the first thing they do is clean up, like maybe they look inside one drawer and see the mess that's there and just look at it for a minute and think about how they might reorganize it if they were going to. When people are very down and out and they decide to make a move forward, in some ways they're facing the whole panoply of problems that confront them in the guise of that single problem, right? It's all lurking behind it, right? It's like they see the tip of a reptile's tail outside a gigantic closet, let's say, and they look and they think, well, that's just the tip of a tail. What harm can it do me? But it's connected to the whole damn beast. And the advantage to that is that if you make that first step forward, you're actually advancing in the face of all that opposition. The disadvantage is that the first task seems so small that you literally have to be on your knees to be humble enough to lower yourself to take that first step. God, is that all I can do? I'm so useless. You might even be more useless than that because you might fail at it. I had lots of clients who would come back, we'd make a deal that they would do something simple. I remember one client, this is such a comical story in a terrible, dark way. He was an overgrown infant and he was 30. He was still living at home in his messy, high school room under the thumb of his mother, conveniently for him, because then he never had to do anything. And he had managed to entice some girl into sleeping with him, and she got pregnant. Now he's going to have a son. And he had enough sense to come to me and say, I'm kind of a wastrel and I've mucked up my life, but maybe I'd like not to destroy this kid. So is there something I could do to put myself together? So, we talked that through. We negotiated, which is what you do with a client if you're sensible. You lay out the problem first. Okay, what the hell's wrong with you, do you think? You have to listen and listen and listen while the person unfolds everything that might be wrong. They put all their cards on the table. And then you sort through them and you think, well, some of that, even they'll figure this out themselves. Some of that's not really the central issue. And so you imagine they lay all the cards on the table and then you kind of get rid of 90% of them. And then you focus on the problem. And then the next thing you think is ask them is something, this is great general problem solving strategy, is okay, if this could be better as far as you're concerned, what would better look like? And then they have to lay their cards on the table about that. So you do the same thing. And now you have the diagnosis, that's the problem statement. And now you have a hypothetical cure, let's say. And now you need a strategy, right? And that would be the steps in between the problem and the final destination. And then you break down the steps until you find a step that the person will take. And you have to do that experimentally. So the first step for him was to vacuum the carpet in his room. And so this is literally what he did. He brought the vacuum. It was a stand-up vacuum. He brought that into his room, but he only got it to the threshold. And then he left it 45 degrees across the door, leaning, and he walked over it for a whole week. And so then he had to come back and tell me, and he was embarrassed. He said, I got the vacuum cleaner just to the doorway and I left it there. And then instead of bringing it into my bedroom, I just, I put an obstacle in my own path and stepped over it for a whole week. It's a very humiliating thing because he knew that his life was on the line. And he knew that his son's life was on the line. And he knew that he was one useless bastard for not being able to bring that vacuum cleaner into the room, but the proper interpretation of that in part is, well, you got the bloody thing out of the closet, didn't you? And sometimes people come back and say, well, that went great and it started me and I did 3 other things and we seem to be on the right track. And sometimes they come back and say, nope, that didn't work at all, like with the vacuum cleaner. And so then you have to think what you do in that situation is make the task smaller. If you make the task small enough, I've never seen anyone not be able to progress if they made the task small enough. But, that can be pretty humiliating. Now, the upside is that once you take that first step, you've looked the beast in the face and you'll start progressing, not linearly, but exponentially in speed. So what's cool is that it doesn't really matter how small that first step is because it'll start doubling and anything that doubles grows unbelievably quickly. And so that's a very useful thing to know too. And that's true when you're learning anything new. It's like you'll feel like an imposter, you'll feel like a fool because you are, and you'll think I'll never get there and the destination might look very distant, but if you take a sufficiently small first step and get the ball rolling, you can be cruising along at a pretty good rate, generally faster than you'll think. You are going to have to listen to your wife 90 minutes a week. Okay. And you might as well just get that through your thick skull. Now, why? If you listen to her enough, you can make peace and you can play. So there's a huge benefit. If you don't listen to her, that will accumulate and you'll listen to her in divorce court. Like, you will eventually listen. And at some point you'll pay for the privilege of doing so, right? Because there'll be other people involved. And then the backlog will be so high that you might never escape from it. You know, and sometimes, especially if the woman, let's say, and this can go both ways, let's be sure about this, but we might as well revert to the stereotypes. And I think it's fair because women are more threat sensitive. So they're more likely to bring up problems. Now, that's the disadvantage is they bring up problems that don't exist because that's a false positive. But the advantage is they bring up problems before you're sensitive enough to see them. And so this is very important if you think about the role of women is the woman is closer to the infant than you. Okay, so you're, doing whatever the hell you're doing. You're concentrating on your career. You're not, especially when the infant's under a year old, you're a step removed now, and good, you can be dealing with the external world, but she's concentrating on the little kids. And one of the things you want to hear from her is what the hell's wrong with the kids before you're wise enough to see it. Now, the price you pay for that is she might be shorting out about things that don't exist. So, and this is especially true if your wife is high in neuroticism, and it could be true if the husband is too, but as I said, that's the more stereotypical situation. So why listen? To get to the signal. Now, will she get to the signal? Yes, although she might not be very good at that, and it might take a lot of listening. But if you listen long enough, she'll get better and better at it, until she'll get really good at it. And then the time between the emergence of the problem and the solution will it'll collapse to the point where it's virtually immediate. Now that's a very high level of mastery. That can take a very long time. But then, you also want to put forward to your wife and yourself the proposition that you're better than you are, which is, I get the problem, I can solve it. It's like, no, you probably don't get the problem. And even if you did, it isn't necessarily the case that you could solve it. And so you have to put up with the fact that you're going to have to be dragged through the mud because she's going to point to, maybe her kid's upset because you're a tyrant. And you probably are a tyrant to some degree, clomping around, overconfident and all that. And so she's going to poke you. Well, maybe this is how you're stupid, and maybe this is how you're stupid, and maybe this is how you're stupid. Long list of potential ways and actual ways you could be stupid. So you have to listen to that. Now, your wife has to act in good faith. One of the things that Tammy and I did when we first got married, because I thought a lot of this through before we got married. I said, look, if we're going to do this, you have to tell me the truth. I don't care what it is. I'll tell you the truth, but you have to tell me the truth. I don't care what the truth is, but it has to be true, right? And so without that, you get nowhere. And you can't trust your partner either. And so your partner has to be all in. That's why you have a marriage vow. Because the marriage vow is basically this. This is the vow. No matter what you tell me, I won't run away. And that's a bitch of a vow, man. Because when someone unveils their whole heart, they unveil themselves all the way down to hell. It's not pleasant. It's awful. And so they need to know that you will not run away. And that's a vow, because what do you know? Look, the person's always going to be thinking, always, if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't love me, you wouldn't be with me. And hey, fair enough, because people are full of snakes. And if all those snakes were revealed, perhaps the logical thing to do would be to run. And so then you might say, well, why not run? It's like, well, you want to run from everyone for the rest of your life? You want to forego the advantages of a permanent relationship? And you're full of snakes too. So you're both making a bad bet. And so you make the bad bet based on the idea that if you are faithful and you are truthful, that you can resolve the issues, and you can. It's a good deal.